So the way that I see it, there is a problem with functionalism that hasn't been solved. But nonetheless, it doesn't necessarily mean that panpsychism is a proper alternative. So the problem is that the current story in neuroscience, or at least most neuroscientists, I assume, are functionalists. And in functionalism, you pretty much have modularity in the brain, this is a fact, and the regions that are closer together tend to have the same function. So the regions dedicated to vision are more connected and spatiotemporally closer to other regions dedicated to vision. But that doesn't answer the question of why certain functions are conscious and other functions aren't conscious. Because ultimately you could define causality from anything that ever happened in the past light cone of whatever process we're talking about. So you could go as far back into that brain, and then there would be a larger temporal grain that would seem very counterintuitive. Like perhaps there's, besides just the experience that you seem to be having, there's like a longer term experience. And then that's complicated by the fact that you have many worlds, right? So you have a whole bunch of these that are longer in temporal grain and a whole bunch of shorter ones perhaps. These could all be defined as having causal relationships and therefore and performing a function. So our current answer just sidesteps all of this and also ignores social functions, like this brain ultimately plays a role in a society which is also organized spatiotemporally. Like a particular city has its own goals, and then a state has its own goals, and then a country. And you can define functions for these, but you don't think these functions are conscious. You don't think that experience is actually happening. So it seems that then the answer for some people is to just become panpsychist and say, well, since we don't have a proper definition of what particular functions are conscious, both in time and space, then everything is conscious. There are a whole bunch of consciousnesses across temporal grains and across connections. Like right now, perhaps there is a consciousness between us which exists. And because we're performing a function there, which could be defined. So why isn't that function conscious? And then some people who believe in the primacy of consciousness will say, well, there's only this particular, I can't doubt consciousness. That's what they will say. Like, I can't doubt that consciousness exists. I can doubt everything else. I could doubt all these causal relationships. I could doubt all science, but I can't doubt the fact that I exist. But I think it's important to sort of step back from that radical view and try to think what causes you to say that. And if you think about it, you can't be epiphenomenal. Like, consciousness can't be epiphenomenal, because if you have something which affects you and is related causally to you saying, I am conscious, then this thing is part of the same mechanism. And if this thing causes you to experience a sight, if this thing causes you to experience a raw sensation, then it can't be epiphenomenal. In other words, it can't be something which is just hovering. It can't be something which is smoke above and beyond the physical contraption. It has to be the physical contraption itself saying, I am conscious. The physical contraption itself seeing things. The physical contraption itself experiencing raw sensations. And so this does lead to counterintuitive things, like the fact that there are no independent souls, there are no independent experiencers of things. That's kind of counterintuitive, but it doesn't necessarily mean panpsychism. Panpsychism is the view that everything is conscious, like I was saying, like there are anything that is performing any function whatsoever is conscious. And you could say everything is performing a function in some way, and everything has causal relations. So I think it is a valid question to ask why our brains, which are also just function, these are just the same, just things performing functions, why are those conscious and not others? I think there might turn out to be an answer to that question. It might be an emergent property that doesn't otherwise exist. It doesn't exist just at random, but it shouldn't be undermined either. We shouldn't act like it's been solved already, or to say that experience doesn't exist somehow, that it's an illusion. So my view is that it's probably, but I'm not sure, if panpsychism could turn out to be true, but it is my suspicion that it is not true, and that consciousness is an emergent property in this way. So it's just particular related processes that create it. But this still leads to open individualism, because all of these experiences are just happening to themselves on the screen of the universe, on the screen of themselves. So they're not happening to an independent soul. They're not happening to a particular being which comes into existence, which is separate. So existence always existed. There was no point at which you can actually say, this was the beginning, the very first experience. And there's no way in which to say, these experiences belong to different experiencers. And that's just because it doesn't make sense from the point of view of relativity. So from the point of view of relativity, you have, you could define a position in which you find yourself like this. And then these are light cones, three-dimensional light cones indicating the speed of light. So it's drawn at 45 degrees because you can't reach anything that's here. Anything that's here is space-like separated from you. You can only reach anything that is within the speed of light in your future. This is your future light cone, and these are things that happened in the past that went into causing your moment. And this is separated from you, so you can never interact with this, you can never see this, but yet it exists. Modern cosmology says that the universe is infinite. Even if it's not infinite, no one actually thinks that the universe ends at our Hubble volume. So therefore, this is a fact. Like, we know for a fact that this must exist, even though you can't empirically see it. There are many things you can't empirically just see. That doesn't mean they're not true. So the universe doesn't end at our Hubble volume. It just goes on. And so therefore, there do exist regions of the universe that you can never interact with. And this is relevant in the sense that if this is moving at a different velocity relative to your reference frame, they're going to see the same set of events that you saw happen, but in different order. So what does that say? I mean, let's give a concrete example. Let's say we have me right here on a train, seeing someone else across the train lighting a cigarette. So this is like the 1800s or something, when people still smoked cigarettes on trains. And that happened, right? And from my perspective, it's just pretty much the same present. It feels like I'm in the same present as that person who just lit their cigarette. It's just an event. It just seems to be that we are in the same present. But what if this guy is moving, even though he can never actually see it, even though he can never actually witness it, because light would be unreachable. I mean, light would literally never reach this guy in time, but his plane of simultaneity, so in other words, the fabric of space-time itself has to accommodate for his existence, for his relativity, for the fact that he's moving at a different velocity relative to my reference frame. And therefore, he's going to see this set of events happen in different order. He can see them happen in a different order. He can see them like way out of time. Like this thing happened first, me sitting there, and then the guy lighting his cigarette. Even though from my perspective, I sat and he lit his cigarette at exactly the same time. So does that indicate that there are multiple versions of the guy? That's the question, and it does. It indicates that the past version of him is still there and is still happening. It must be the case that it's still happening. So we're inscribed in this eternal block. This is called, in philosophy at least, the B theory of time, which indicates that we exist inside of a tenseless object. So because all reference frames are just as real, and in fact we have our own reference frames, like wherever you exist, you have your own reference frame, and I have my own reference frame. And it's not just an entire conscious being that has his own reference frame. It's like every neuron has its own reference frame. So it's an entirely super messy picture. It's not just every neuron. Then you get into unifying quantum mechanics with special relativity, and you get into quantum field theory. But the point is, the entire thing must be eternal. Like, it can't be the case that only one now exists for everyone and is ticking forward. That's the misconception that a lot of people have, and that leads to a fundamental belief in souls. Whether you believe that they are destroyed at some point because you lost a capacity for a faith in a religion, and so, but you still believe in the soul, but you just now believe that the soul is a brain, and then it dies. But that's not the case. So what is actually going to happen is you're just not going to remember. You're not going to ever remember in the same way that I can't remember being you, because there's literally no information in my brain right now in this moment, in this brain, that contains any experience related to you. So obviously it can't remember being you. But from that location, that experience is just that experience. It doesn't belong to anyone, just like this doesn't belong to anyone. And the past is still there. So you can't really make sense of this soul that is traveling towards its doom. There are just these emergent causal relationships which are experiences, and they all feel themselves to be flowing from wherever they're located. And it's not the case that all of them feel themselves to be flowing. There may exist experiences that don't even feel like they're flowing. And then the question is, how do you get out of them? If there are eternal experiences out there, and we are them also, but can't know it. So the question then is, how do you get out of them? How am I here and not there? The answer is it's like, it really sucks because you can't feel it, but you are there. And if you told that mind that it was here, it also wouldn't get it, probably. It wouldn't understand it, because that experience is just that experience, is kind of the point. If they don't belong to anyone, you might as well say that you're all experiences, but can't tell from each location. Or you could just deny experience. That's the other alternative, to say that this is a lie and nothing is happening. But the sort of compromise in between them of closed individualism, to say that you are a soul that has bounds, that began at some point and that ends at some point and that was traveling through time, just doesn't bear out with the physics. Like, there's no way to make sense of it whatsoever. And so, but I think this is important to understand, because this can free you from a lot of existential angst that a lot of people have from dying, because they really believe like they're going to be obliterated. And it's still pretty bad, because it's ensured that you're going to be destroyed, in the sense that you're already being destroyed. Like, you're not going to remember anything as you move along, as entropy continues. And you're never going to remember your experiences. But another important sort of point to get people to realize this is the fact that the universe is 13.8 billion years old. Like, if it was a case that the universe was actually 13.8 billion years old, and you were a specific soul that just happened to pop into existence, and that's going to plop back out of existence at some point, that would be a miracle, because the universe, and we're not even discussing other embryonic universes, we're just talking about this universe, is going to go on for hundreds of trillions of years. So the fact that you find yourself at the very beginning of it is a miracle. Like, a lot of people who argue against creationists say, well, why would the universe take so long to create us? Obviously, we're not the center. But actually, that person isn't taking into account how young the universe actually is. Like, it's a baby. It physically just began. Like, previous to this, there pretty much were no stars. It was all condensed into baryonic plasma. And before that, quark gluon plasma. And before that, you had like symmetry breaking, right? Which allowed for all of this to happen. But it just began. Like, in cosmic terms, it's a baby. And so it would be a miracle to say that we just happen to find ourselves at the very beginning of something that's going on, and that's going to explode also in terms of intelligence. Because as soon as something that develops intelligence, starts to take off, there's going to be far more experiential mass. Because I'm assuming that intelligence is also going to involve experiences, and that may not be the case. I mean, you could dissociate intelligence and effectiveness at colonizing galaxies and stuff from consciousness. It seems that consciousness is another function that serves a social role in mammals, which is sort of perhaps even hindering intelligence. It seems to be that chimpanzees, for example, are intelligent, but less conscious than orangutans. And orangutans are more conscious, but less intelligent. And more conscious just in the sense that they recognize themselves in a mirror better, but they're less capable of doing stuff than chimpanzees. So it may be that if you're highly conscious, that doesn't mean you're highly intelligent. And there may be people who are very intelligent and have lower levels of consciousness. So that's probably, and some people might then go and accuse all these reductionists and eliminativists who say consciousness is an illusion. Maybe it is an illusion for them. Maybe they have high levels of intelligence and low levels of consciousness, so it could be easy for them to say, yeah, I could do without it. I'm not even sure it exists because it's so tenuous. Perhaps, I don't think that's the case. I think we have very similar brain architectures, but I wouldn't put it out of the question either. But yeah, I mean, the main hypotheses right now are that consciousness evolved for the purpose of social bonding and to orchestrate a lot of our beliefs and our capacity for having a society. So consciousness is very useful for that, and actually takes energy away from just raw intelligence. Raw intelligence would just be the capacity to do things in a state of flow, which can seep out into non-consciousness. And I mean, you get this from all the processes that you automate, if you think about it. When you automate so many processes, which are like the vast majority of everything you do, you're not even conscious of them because you don't have to be. But nonetheless, they can be intelligent processes that they do require a level of intelligence. So yeah, that's kind of just my spiel right now.